Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 5 of the Hulu series Pam and Tommy, entitled Uncle Jim and Aunt Susie in Duluth. The title's pretty straightforward. I believe they used this line in the episode, and it's kind of to describe that kind of like the Midwestern flyover area that people generally consider places that they don't really need to be concerned with. And it's presented to Jay Leno at some point in this episode that this Pam and Tommy sex tape is worth talking about or adding to his monologue. And one of the writers makes the joke that like basically like not enough people know about it, and that if Uncle Jim and Aunt Susie don't know about it yet, then it's not big enough of a story to talk about. So that's kind of the theme of this episode, though, is the idea that they being Pam and Tommy, continue to tell themselves that they can contain this, and they can't. And eventually it's gonna reach Uncle Jim and Aunt Susie, and it does in the form of kind of like just hitting places that it wouldn't normally hit if it wasn't spreading. So you think of the LA Times, Jay Leno's monologue, Penthouse editors, things like that. So the tape is expanding, people are seeing it, and now it's something that's on Jay Leno's monologue, and that is not good for Pam and Tommy. So this episode kind of mainly focuses on not just Pam and Tommy's different interpretations of the severity of the tape, but how each of them are handling it as well. Like the impact to them is very different, and the way they look at it and the way they look at the impact that it's having on the other person is very different as well. So we got to start out with Pam. Well, I don't know how we start out. This is how I'm going to start off. Pam kind of accuses Tommy of subliminally wanting the tape to get out, or at the very least subliminally. Wow, I can't believe how much I struggle with that. Subliminally, boom, I knew I could nail it. Wants to not do as much to pull the tape. And on the surface of things, that seems like a pretty harsh reaction. Tommy, I think, even says, at one point, this was about her career more so. But he basically says, like, I've done everything. I've been your biggest supporter. He also says that, I've done everything and it's not enough to satisfy you. You always seem to be pissed off. So that accusation that he kind of wants to keep it out there, on the surface, seems pretty harsh. But throughout the rest of the episode, though, we kind of see evidence that he might. Because we see Tommy kind of like having to grapple with his dwindling stardom. So like there's a moment where he's at like a bar or a club. He's not recognizing the music that's being played. He goes in the bathroom, and there's a guy who recognizes him, but he recognizes him for the sex tape for the most part, and says it's the best thing he's put out since a song he put out 7 years ago, which sets Tommy off. There's a moment where he realizes his band has been, I guess you could say, downgraded to Studio B. He goes into Studio A, and Third Eye Blind is in there, and he finds out that they both are on Elektra. So that essentially means that Elektra chose to book Third Eye Blind for the main studio and to essentially demote Motley Crue to the B studio. So there's several moments in here where we see Tommy struggling to deal with his dwindling stardom. So it's not completely implausible to think that he might be interested, at the very least subliminally, in keeping this tape out there just to keep his name out there, just to keep his popularity out there. So I think that's an interesting thing to kind of flesh out, but I'm going to talk about that in a kind of like through a different lens as well, as it pertains to the quality of the show a little bit later. So Pam, on the other hand, kind of seems to be getting the worst of this. We see earlier in the episode that she has an interview / cover story with Glamour magazine, and by the end of the episode, after the tape is kind of multiplied in its importance and how well known it is, we find out that essentially it seems like it's being pulled. They don't say that directly, but we are to infer that it's getting pulled. And then also, she has this back and forth with Tommy and the lawyers about whether or not they should kind of like preemptively sue Penthouse. And, Tommy and the lawyers are all like, he's going to put the pictures out. We got to take it to him, get ahead of this, yada, yada, yada. She doesn't agree. she kind of feels like it could be poking the bear, like we don't really know what he has planned. She is talked down by the lawyers. They proceed with the lawsuit, and then Pam alone ends up getting a summons to be deposed regarding this lawsuit. And I think that's interesting because this is not a Pamela Lee situation. This is a Tommy situation. This is a Pam situation. This is their lawyers, all of these different people. But somehow, for some reason, Pam is the focus of this. And I think that's just another way the show is kind of leaning into the idea of the woman getting the raw deal in this situation. Harkening back to probably I think it was episode 1. Well, not episode 1 because the tape hadn't been stolen yet. But whenever the tape gets out, I want to say it was episode 3 or 4, something like that. Pam says something to the effect of I'm going to be looked at as a slut. This is way worse for me. And you're going to be looked at as a hero. And I think this kind of plays into that even more, right? You see Tommy saying, I'm going to do everything I can to stop this. He has an idea. She doesn't agree with it. She's talked down, and then she ends up being right. And again, Tommy looks like somebody who can't quite handle this situation, or even worse, someone who's not particularly interested in handling the situation. But I do think Tommy's genuine. I do think that he sees how harmful this is to her. He does want to help. He does want to fix things. But you can't ignore everything that the show has shown us about his dwindling stardom, how that's affecting him and his demeanor, and then the idea of the fact that at the end of the day, the tape is not a negative for him. And that says something about just the way we kind of live nowadays. So, and the way we live versus the way we lived back then. But it's still, actually, no, it doesn't say anything about that. There's no comparison. That's just how it is. Whether the tape comes out in 1996 or the tape comes out in 2022, the man's going to be on the good side of things. The woman's going to be on the bad side. So a couple of other things I want to talk about are some of the pros and cons of this episode, and I want to give a thought. I don't have too much to say about this episode, but the reason for that I'm going to talk about in my pros and cons here. So something that I thought was interesting in this episode, I'm going to give 3 examples. The pulling of the glamour story, the LA Times writer who pushed her editor to talk about this story and was shot down 2 or 3 times, and Tommy's I'm sad at the very beginning are all indicative of what I like to say is a show treating us like we're smart. At no point are any of these things, not at no point, because it had with the editor, this happens a couple of times. So, and one time it is pretty obvious, but it's directly said. But when the glamour story is pulled, we don't get a direct thing from Pamela saying, "Oh, the glamour story was pulled. I'm depressed." We overhear a message on an answering machine. Well, Tommy hears it, and we hear it, and it's basically, and the woman doesn't even really say the story got pulled, but you could tell by her tone and the call me back that the story's being pulled. And then you have the LA Times editor. There's a scene where, when she first poses this as a potential story, the editor's like, "No, we're not doing no fucking sex tape. What do you think this is? The National Enquirer?" He's not feeling it at all. But the second time she comes back, and I think she mentions the lawsuit or something like that. And she seems certain, okay, now he thinks this is news. And then they cut to her angrily throwing a ball or something like that. And we are left to infer that she was again rejected. And then you have the Tommy's I'm sad, which he doesn't say why, but again, we are left to infer that it's probably because of the miscarriage. And I like the fact that we are left to infer what happened in these situations, because I like when shows treat us like we're intelligent human beings. And I just released a video yesterday about the new Peacock show, Bel-Air. And Bel-Air has a problem with that. And this is the difference between network TV and cable TV, is that network TV often wants to hold your hand and walk you through to these conclusions without actually letting you figure it out for yourself. And I mentioned that I had in my notes multiple times, Carlton looks jealous. And it's not because I'm noticing that Carlton looks jealous. It's because the show is hanging on his face for 5 seconds looking pissed off. Hey, in case you didn't realize, Carlton's pissed off here. I don't like that. So I like the fact that this episode had a few moments where they didn't directly go, "Hey, here's what's happening here." They let us kind of infer what was going on and treated us like we were smart. So I appreciate that. One of the cons that I had here, though, is that this was a short episode, and which is why this video is going to be short. This is a short episode, and I can't help but wonder if that's partially because, not because, but I can't help but wonder if there's some sort of correlation between your shortest episode also not featuring your most interesting character, that being Rand, played by Seth Rogen. Like everything with Rand and Offerman's character, what's his name? Something with an M. I can't remember. Milty. All that stuff I found really interesting. And they kind of left us on what I deemed as a cliffhanger with them, because it felt to me like Milty was about to go steal all the money and like bail. So that's the last place we left that. And to have Rand out of the episode, Milty out of the episode, and have it also be the shortest episode, I think that kind of says a lot about how much the characters drive the narrative on this show. And with Pam and Tommy being the main characters, for a show, for an episode, again, featuring them, to be one of the lesser interesting episodes, like, just like episode 2. I didn't like episode 2, and I'm not gonna say I didn't like this episode, but it did nothing for me. I wasn't anticipating it coming in. I didn't watch it and go, oh man, I can't wait to record a video. I just watched it and I was like, okay, well, that happened. I watched it, it existed, but it wasn't anything that like really knocked my socks off, or anything that I felt like, oh, I really need to come and talk about blank, 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 blank. And I think that is indicative of an issue with your central characters just not being that interesting, or not even necessarily not being that interesting, but not being very likable or relatable. They're doing something with Pamela. I will give them that. Or they're starting to make her very sympathetic and someone that you could look at and go, like, I understand more clearly now what she's dealing with. So I will give them that. But like watching Pam and Tommy, it just doesn't do anything for me. At least not on the show. But it doesn't really do anything for me. So I don't really need, I'm not gonna say I don't really need, but like I need some more of those other characters around to help make these episodes better. And I just think it's a sign of that being the case, that you need those other characters, that when you remove them and you're left with just Pam and Tommy, you end up with a 30-minute episode as opposed to like a 46-minute one. So that's really all I have about this week's episode. I kind of feel like this show is just okay. It's not doing anything particularly special. It's doing things well. I will give it that. But it's not doing anything that makes me want to go out here and tell people like, yo, you got to watch this shit. Yo, you got to watch, like it's not doing anything like that. So, I think there's maybe like 7 episodes, so only 2 more. I'll still stick around for those last 2, but at the end of the day, I don't think this is anything that's really gonna leave a blip on anyone's radar as far as like, oh, this is something you need to be checking out, or this show is doing something particularly special. It's giving us societal issues that we already know still exist now in 2022. And it's giving us that through a different lens, the lens of something that we only looked at as just like, hey, it's 2 people who are celebrities with a sex tape out. And that's really all we looked at it as. It's now, this show is kind of changing that to where we can now see it through the lens of 2022 and the abuse and just complete disregard for people's privacy that is a lot more accepted nowadays than it was even known back then, let alone accepted. So that's all I got for this week, and I will see you guys next week for episode 6. Peace.